It is just a huge honor for me to bring back Mike the Man DiTolla for my 400th podcast. When I started this show, gosh, what was it, a year and a half ago or something like that, 16, 18 months ago? You were my first guest, and then we had you back at number 200. So Ryan and I thought we should have you back at 400, but due to timing and all that, it's like 404, 405. But how the heck are you, Mike the Man?
I'm doing great, and it's an honor to be I don't know if that's bicentennial, whatever every 200 is. I'm sure there's some complicated Latin-based word that I don't know for every 200 episodes, but it's nice to be back here with you again, and nice to get a chance to chat with you. I've been good. As you know, about 9 months ago, I left Glidewell after 15 years, and went over to Sirona, which 7 days later became Dentsply Sirona and became the biggest company in dentistry. And so we've been staying busy with that. And I guess probably the biggest thing that's happened since I've been there is at Chicago Midwinter this year, we actually launched Chairside solid zirconia. And so that's been a big deal because when I was at Glidewell, we were right on the cusp of solid zirconia. We launched that back in 2009. And that just blew up the industry. It took off. It became the fastest growing product in the history of Glidewell Laboratories and continues to grow. And now there's 15 other brands of solid zirconia out there. And so the launch of Bruxer was one of the bigger changes that has occurred in dentistry. And I feel privileged to have had a seat to be able to watch it and help develop it and introduce it to the world. So I've always loved solid zirconia, and a lot of other dentists have too. And so it was nice coming to Sirona and being able to be part of this project to develop and launch CEREC zirconia. So it's a solid zirconia crown that can be made chairside in a single visit in the same amount of time as Emax.
So, Mike, if you want to be a higher quality dentist, the first thing out of the gate is just magnification, going from naked eyes to loupes, going from getting a scope to drop down and look at your root canal before you fill it and find a missed canal or a bunch of crud in some canal. Chairside milling, I have to say that when the oral scanning part, when you see your prep 20, 30, 40 times better. I mean, the first time I remember I scanned my prep, I thought a monkey had prepped the tooth. And you look at it, you're just like, are you kidding me? And it just changed everything. But it seems like a lot of people who got into chairside milling are now finding out that they're doing far more chairside scanning because you're busy, you're swamped, you got a broke tooth, you don't have time to mill it out, but you definitely want to oral scan. And you were saying last time that labs who receive impressions were averaging about a 6% remake, and labs that received an optical impression were about a 1% remake. Do you still agree with all that?
Yeah, well, yeah, and to kind of hit on everything that you mentioned, I agree that magnification is the key to becoming a better dentist as clinically, as quickly as possible. And when we were in dental school, we did not have loupes. There was nobody wearing loupes at the time. And it's funny, I was just talking to a recent graduate who wore loupes for all 4 of her years of dental school. And she told me that maxillary molars have 4 canals. And they have this, MB2 canal. And I told her that's amazing because 28 years ago when I was in school, humans only had 3 canals in their maxillary molars. And I don't understand why in a short 28 years, evolution would put a 4th canal into a maxillary molar. It makes no sense to me what the functional significance of that 4th canal is, but it does probably explain my low success rate with endo. But you're right, when it comes time to scan your first preparation, I remember turning the screen away from my dental assistant because I was so embarrassed what the prep looked like. I didn't want her to see it and start making fun of my preparation. And that really is the key, is scanning it. And the great part is, in the beginning, you could magnify your prep, but it was still up to you to kind of look at the prep, decide what was wrong, and go back and fix it. But the software that we have today, like the CEREC 4.4 software, When you scan your preparation, it gives you feedback on your preparation. It'll tell you if the margin is too rough, for Emax crown, for example, whether you're going to mill it or send it to the lab. It'll tell you whether or not you've got enough reduction. It'll measure from the preparation to the opposing tooth and give you some feedback there as well. It'll show you where you have undercuts on your preparation, so you can go in and correct those undercuts before you mill the crown or send it to the lab. So we finally have more intelligent software that, instead of just magnifying it, which is a good first step, it also goes a step farther and actually gives you feedback and tells you what kind of changes to make. In fact, one of the exciting parts about the merger between Dentsply and Sirona is, as I've gotten to know some of the Dentsply family that we're now married to, over in the endodontic division, they've been working on combining cone beams with endo treatment, kind of like we've been doing cone beams and implant placement on the Sirona side. And they're able to see all the canals in a maxillary molar, for example, and see where the orifices are. And so they're already working on prototypes at this point, where if you take a cone beam of a patient and you're going to do endo on, say, tooth number 14, kind of like there's a surgical guide for placing implants, they're coming up with an endodontic access guide where you snap this thing onto the top of a molar, and it's got holes in it where you just drop the burrs down into those holes, and it drops you right into the orifices of any canals that are there. So pretty sweet way to be able to do endo, for example. And that has to do, again, with magnification. In this case, it's 3D magnification with the cone beam, but we can only become better as dentists when we start to scan things. And so you're right, the remake rate inside of a laboratory is lower by a couple percentage points for digital impressions than it is for traditional. But it's hard to tell if it's because the fact that digital impressions are more accurate, because they are slightly more accurate. But I don't think that's that big of a deal. We all know polyvinyl and polyether are probably accurate enough. I think that because you have to take better care of the tissue on a digital impression than you do with polyvinyl, I think the dentists who are pretty good already have been the early adopters of digital impressions, and they're taking even better impressions with digital impressions. But if you just went out tomorrow, Howard, and decided for fun that you were going to buy 100,000 digital impression units and force every dentist in America to do it, I'm pretty sure that number would creep up, because right now digital impressions are more difficult clinically, a little bit. You have to take better care of the tissue, I should say, than with traditional impressions. And so I really think if you gave most dentists a digital impression scanner today, they'd probably say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to stick with polyvinyl because I can beat up the tissue a little bit more and not have to worry about it so much. So there is a lower remake with those digital impressions. It's just hard to say if it's because of the operators, the technology, or it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah, and you also got to understand that the nature of your sample, like people will claim all these health benefits from yoga, but I'm sure people who do yoga every day are less likely to drink, smoke, get high, do mushrooms, eat cheeseburgers and bacon. They're probably more likely to do 100 other variables that make them healthy also. Let's switch gears completely and go to cements, because it's kind of funny how we've been doing this for 3 decades, you and I, and a lot of people are going back to the original zinc phosphate cement, especially in implants. The question is going to be, what are you going to cement Bruxer with? Because it seems like now, after 30 years of trying all these funky winker being cements, people are going back to, you cement a crown on an implant. You don't see the flash of some of these non-radiopaque cements. Some people like zinc phosphate because it's antibacterial. What do you think of zinc phosphate cement? What do you recommend cementing Bruxer with?
Well, my favorite cement.
Are you holding the Wi-Fi in your hand?
No, I'm just holding the microphone itself. I wanted to lean back a little bit. I was leaning forwards towards the camera, and then you were coming too close, and I felt like we were about to kiss. So I wanted to move back so our lips didn't accidentally brush against each other. No, I'm going old school like you do when you lecture with the handheld microphone. My favorite cement is called Ceramer, Ceramir, from a Swedish company called Doxa, and it's a glass ionomer calcium aluminate cement. So it's like a bioactive cement, and I'll explain more about that later. But to the flavor of what you were saying, I'm a huge fan of cementation. I think it's just a classic dental value that we got away from. And so when you and I got out of school, there was the aesthetic revolution. You and I were in the first graduating class at LVI. Empress was a huge deal, and it was all about more aesthetic and more aesthetic materials. And these materials were more aesthetic, but they were also way weaker. And so we had to start, adhesively bonding them into place. We couldn't cement these materials into place anymore. And then as time went on, we were kind of fed a message that bonding was always better than cementation, that it was always preferable. And we were creating a hybrid layer, sealing off the dent and doing all these things. And I feel exactly the opposite. And you know it, you had personal experience, not even from resin cement. I remember you got your amalgams taken out and you had class 1 posterior composites put in, and you were eating Motrin by the handful to try to get the pain to go away. And you were convinced, I remember you telling me you thought you were going to need at least 2 or 3 different endos, and you'd go into detail about your black tarry stools. And thank God your teeth finally started to feel better so you could
I had
stop.
to make a decision 2 weeks. What was worse, the diarrhea from the Motrin or my teeth hurting? And in about 2 weeks, it was kind of a balance where I just dropped the Motrin because my other end was more sore than my top end. And eventually all went away, but it was a horrible month.
Exactly, and that's and you at least knew as a dentist, you were able to at least kind of know what was going on, even though it scared the hell out of you. But as a patient, they'd be much more confused and probably willing to pull the trigger on endo much sooner. So we were just kind of told and taught that bonding was always better. It was a higher, more noble way to put a crown into place. But most of us really like cementation, and the dentists that I dealt with through Glidewell all like cementation as well. And so I think we're kind of, with these stronger materials like Emax and like solid zirconia, we're able to get back to this traditional value of cementing again. And I think we got away from it the same way that we got away from monolithic restorations. You look at cast gold back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, a great restoration, the best material we've ever had in dentistry. Patients just think it looks really fugly if you can see it. And so we got away from that, and we went to other more aesthetic things like the PFM, which required more preparation, and there was a chance that the glass on the outside of it would break. And we've kind of switched, and the pendulum's gone back to these monolithic materials like Emax and solid zirconia. And at the same time, the pendulum thus came back on utilizing bonding only when necessary and cementing anytime that we can. And so cementing is a traditional value. My dad practiced for 35 years and cemented every single restoration and didn't have nearly the postoperative sensitivity that I did, doing veneers on people who just wanted a cosmetic change. And now 3 of their teeth felt just like your teeth did, after I put these veneers on. So I think we're starting to come back to something that does have a historical, long clinical track record of doing very well. And that is cementation. And so it's great to get back to some restorations that are strong enough to be cemented into place, because it's simple, easy to do, predictable, low to no postoperative sensitivity, because we're not taking acid and dumping it all over the dentin.
Hey, on this Dentsply Sirona merge, I can't think of it. I mean, God, you lectured for Gordon Christian. You were the clinical director at Glidewell. I mean, I don't know anybody who's been at 30,000 feet as long as you have in dentistry. Does this change anything for the dentist, the little guy? I mean, is this mostly a Wall Street finance thing, or do you see some synergies where 2 people bring something to the table that 1 + 1 = 3, or is that mostly was it just mostly a Wall Street conglomeration thing?
Well, all those negotiations took place, before I was with the company. Like I said, I was there for 6 days and then it was announced. So it had been long. It had been a long stage of planning, and it was already taking place at CEREC 30 by the time we were getting ready to start the show. But when you just look at the 2 companies, there's probably not a dentist in America who doesn't have 1 or 2 Dentsply products in their office. A lot of the stuff that Shine and Patterson and people sell are Dentsply products. They own a lot of great brands. And then on the other hand, you have Sirona, which is strictly or was strictly a high-tech equipment company and really had no consumables to speak of until maybe now with the CEREC Zirconia blocks that go in the mills. And so it does seem like a very logical combination of an equipment company with a consumables company, and being able to use the equipment that Sirona makes to now create new blocks within the Dentsply restorative department that will go into the mills and be able to be used like that, and also be able to have a cement system that goes along with it, and then be able to have surgical guides and other things which can now be milled in office with the latest CEREC software, and have that go along with one of the 2 or 3 brands of implants that Dentsply owned. So Dentsply had a lot of great brands under their umbrella, but really didn't have any, high-tech equipment of their own. They were more a consumables company. And so it's a kind of a great combination, I think, because of the two. But much like American Airlines and US Air, or United and Continental. United and Continental have been together for over 4 years now, and the pilots, there's still 3 separate contracts that the pilots are on. So the mergers, I think, for big companies can be difficult, but we're already starting to see, I think, some benefits at this year's Ciro World meeting, which is coming up this August. And unlike CEREC 30, where it was essentially a meeting that was focused on CAD/CAM technology and cone beam technology, at this meeting, because of the fact we were able to tap into the educational network of Dentsply, we now have wonderful educational tracks in like all 10 areas of dentistry, including implants, including restorative, including hygiene, including endo. Cliff Ruddle's going to be there. And so we've got the ability now to really put on a CE event that's aimed at every GP in America, and not just the dentist who's interested in either chairside, CAD/CAM, or cone beam.
And you're not going back to Vegas. You're going to be where in Florida? Where in Florida?
This one's in Florida, in Orlando, and that was mainly from feedback received from dentists. I learned from you early on that 2/3 of the dentists are east of the Mississippi River, and that's certainly true. And so a lot of the dentists who came to CEREC 27.5 and CEREC 30 gave feedback, when we asked them what they would change about the event. Nearly 50% of them said they would prefer an East Coast event. And so, going into it, we thought, well, let's try an East Coast event. If that's what they want, let's do one in Orlando and then go back to Vegas next year. So it remains to be seen if it's going to continue to alternate back and forth. If both of them are supported, I see no reason not to do it. I guess if I was forced to pick between the two, I'd pick Vegas. I think there's just a lot more things going on there. And I think when you have it in Vegas, it encourages dentists to bring their staff members, whereas Orlando maybe encourages them to bring their family. And just from my standpoint, I'd rather have them bring their staff members, because we have a whole track for the dental assistants and one for the hygienists in the front office as well. So it's probably pretty expensive to bring your staff and your family. So maybe Vegas suits that a little bit better. But the East Coast dentists have placed their requests, and we're gonna honor it, at least for this first year. And we're happy to go to Florida.
And what's the date on the Orlando Ciro World?
That's going to be this August, and it's going to be August 11th to the 13th.
11 to the 13th, Orlando. And will Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck be there?
You're going to be dressed as Minnie Mouse, actually. I'm not sure who's going to be Mickey, but I don't know if we'll have any characters on site. But, it's actually, when you go to pick a hotel there, it's kind of tough to do something this big at one of the Disney hotels. So we're just off the Disney property. And there's a guy named Harry Rosen who used to work for Disney and then started his own hotels. And so it's the Rosen Shingle Creek Resort. It's right on the Shingle Creek golf course. And the cool part is we rented out the entire hotel. So the whole thing's
Which hotel?
It's called the Rosen Shingle Creek Resort.
Rosen Shingle Creek Resort.
Yeah, so Rosen's the guy's name. Shingle Creek is the golf course, even though it sounds like an ailment that your grandmother might get. The Rosen Shingle Creek Resort. And we've rented out the entire thing, all the rooms there, just for dentists and their staff. In fact, we rented all the rooms except for 10 of them because the Rosen family has this long-standing contract with Virgin Atlantic, and there's the flight from London to Orlando, and so the flight attendants get to use these 10 rooms, the flight crews, and so it's going to be 4,000 to 6,000 dentists and 10 flight attendants, and I'll let you figure out which ones are which, Howard, out by the pool. See if you can tell which ones are the flight attendants.
Right on. Hey, we have there's a huge number of hygienists that are fans of this show. What's new in hygiene? You said you have a hygiene track at Ciro World and an assisting track and a...
Yeah, that's a good question. What's new in hygiene? I'm not sure what's new in hygiene myself, but with Dentsply being the owner of the Cavitron brand, they had a couple different hygienists who they're sending over to help kind of design this track for us, and they are probably the number one sponsors of hygiene education today. And so I really deferred to them and allowed them to put together their hygiene track the way that they saw fit. I didn't want to step in and try to put together a hygiene track based on the
Well,
fact that
email them and CC me, Howard at dentaltown.com, and bring them on the show long before August so they can talk about their track and drum up some excitement about it. Tell us what's hot and what's not.
yeah, we're getting ready to start announcing all those tracks and some of the different actual courses themselves. There's stuff on implants in the hygiene tract, oral cancer, and HPV, marketplace realities in treating oral diseases, preventive and therapeutic protocols as I look at the list of courses, although they haven't been announced yet. But yeah, I'd love to do that because we're really trying to design it as something that every GP would be interested in, rather than have it be, a meeting focused strictly on digital technology. This one's going to have endo implants and everything.
So, Mike, I'm going to ask you the longest question on my podcast. I'm going to rant for about 2 minutes and then have you rant back at it. So, you and I have been in this game, clinical dentistry, 3 decades. We got out, we saw Orthodontic Centers of America get a big line of credit, start rolling up all these orthodontic offices, makes it to the New York Stock Exchange. As soon as the orthodontists are free of their contract, they all leave and it goes bankrupt. There were a dozen on NASDAQ. Now it's completely gone for 10 years, and now corporate dentistry is back. Do you think they're different this time? Do you think they're here to stay, or do you think what percent of the market do you think they have now? What percent do they get? What's different this time?
This time it seems like they are really well funded. It seems like, you look at a group like Pacific Dental out here in Southern California, the one who I'm most familiar with, Steve Thorne's group. And I got to say, that's one, only because I have the most exposure to that group. I would not hesitate to send one of my family members to a Pacific practice. In fact, I have before for a family member who lives in Colorado. And they really have a commitment to fee-for-service dentistry. In fact, their offices tend to look like a fee-for-service practice on steroids, if you will. And so they've got a chairside Sirona CEREC milling unit, and a scanning unit in every one of their offices, and they're just really committed to doing things the right way. They won't even name their offices Pacific Dental, because they know that, other chains have given corporate dentistry such a bad name when they're all named the same thing. So they're all named based on their location. So they could be Ahwatukee Family Dentistry or wherever, Tempe Family Dentistry or whatever it would happen to be. And there's just a real strong commitment that you see there to doing things in a fee-for-service way. And I love the interactions that I had with some of their dentists. The toughest thing for them, Howard, is that most of the new dentists that they're hiring to become associates and then hopefully one day owners are recent graduates. And I don't know if you've talked to a lot of recent graduates today, but the way they're graduating from school, the clinical procedures that they've done are way lower than us. I think you and I had to do something like 25 crowns to graduate from dental school. And I'm routinely talking to students who graduated this past year who have done between, say, 3 and 6 crowns to graduate. I talked to a kid the other day from the University of Pittsburgh at one of my lectures, and I asked him about his endo experience, and he said, I've done 3 root canals. And I said, that's not very many. He said, I know, I really wish I would have got the chance to do a molar. And I was like, wait a minute, you're graduating from a U.S. dental school and you didn't do a molar? And he said, well, I did an extracted one. I go, well, yeah, as it turns out, where the degree of difficulty really goes up, it's when it's still connected to the maxilla. You numbskull. Now go demand your money back from that school. And so a lot of the corporate dental groups are hiring these dentists who don't have a lot of clinical confidence or competence, I guess, for that matter. So they're having to do a lot of training, and it's costing them, $20,000 to train them. And some of them, they've got a pretty big turnover, 35, 40% of their associates. And so they're opening new locations. Like Pacific won't buy an existing dentist office. They only want to start it from scratch. And here are the ground rules. We're going to be open Monday through Saturday. It's a lot of the dental mania stuff you used to talk about. I think if you looked at a Pacific office, you'd be impressed, and you'd seen that they had read your book, that book of yours, From All those years ago. And they really do a lot of the things that you talk about. It's all about, they have a whole real estate department to pick exactly where that office is going to go. So it's a high traffic area, and they just make these amazing investments in real estate and then build these great looking offices that are very inviting to the patient as well. And they'll get 110 patients there first new month. And they'll do it these days. It's easier than you and Judith walking from door to door with balloons like you did it back in the old day because of social media and things like that. So they're limited. Their number one limiting factor is trying to find a dentist who can, and they don't have real high requirements that they're looking for. Steve once told me they're basically looking for dentists who can diagnose a $1.50 worth of production. So like maybe $900 to $1,000. They're looking for somebody who can diagnose $900 to $1,000 a day and then do $900 to $1,000 a day in production. And they're having a really hard time finding recent graduates who fit that bill. So I think their growth would be a lot higher than it already is, except for the fact that they're hiring a lot of the graduating class who's been kind of undertrained if you look compared to what we did. And so that's kind of holding them back right now. But when you see the investment that the retired teachers up in Ontario made in Heartland, it certainly seems like this is a different era for the corporate dental groups than we've seen before. And I'm just now starting to attend some of those meetings because we do have a whole division of Sirona that's dedicated to the dental groups. Like I said, Pacific has a CEREC unit in every one of their 550 offices. Steve made an amazing commitment. He thinks, and you probably think too, that there's, one of the things that's very patient friendly is doing crowns in an hour and a half so people don't have to wear a temporary for 2 weeks and then come back 2 weeks later.
So, Mike, there's a huge thread on Dentaltown today, and it basically says prevalence of sensitivity after composites. And I have to say that since we launched Dentaltown in 1998, there's always a long thread going a mile long about people complaining about sensitivity after composites.
Right.
In fact, I wish you would chime in on that. Prevalence of sensitivity after composites, and it's already several thousand views and comments, everything. What would you say to that without seeing the thread?
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think if you had started Dentaltown in 1965, which would have been there would have been some technological hurdles in your way, but let's say you had started, do you think a bunch of people would have been posting about post-operative sensitivity under my amalgams?
No.
Right. And so that's etching to me is the acid etching with 37% phosphoric acid. And I know when you start saying things like this, the quote unquote great dentists out there will give you a lot of shit about, well, you're just not as good at it as I am. I use self-etch for everything. Anytime I'm touching dentin, I'm using a self-etching dentin bonding agent. There's no way today that I would put phosphoric acid on dentin unless I had a gun to my head. So I'll do it for veneers, but I'm trying to do minimal prep veneers where all the margins are still in enamel, but I want to etch the least amount of dentin possible. Otherwise, I'm using self-etch on dentin all the time. And the big difference is self-etch doesn't remove the smear layer. Now, if you're going to ask, well, why weren't my dad's crowns sensitive? Why weren't my dad's amalgams sensitive? And they were using zinc phosphate. It's that smear layer. When you prep a tooth and you occlude all those dentinotubules with all that crud, that smear layer, that seems to do a darn good job of desensitizing, even if you use flex cement, like you mentioned earlier. And then if you start, getting elegant and trying to bond to the dentin and the collagen, and you're using that acid etch to remove that smear layer, you're creating, billions of superhighways into the nerve. And just like you found out on your own class 1 composites, that's going to go nuts until that somehow that nerve inside that tooth can finally get rid of that inflammation and it can go away. And so to etch dentin today, I mean, you can do selective etch and just etch the enamel margins if you want. Just try not to, rinse it onto the tooth itself. But I'm just all about self-etch. I think etching dentin has been one of those things. And thankfully, it wasn't too, it probably resulted in unnecessary root canals. But at least it didn't kill anybody. So as far as, a whole industry like dentistry swinging one way and then moving the other, which it feels like is happening. At least it wasn't like failed hip implants or something like that. It was just a few or maybe a couple tens of thousands of needless endo from that post-operative sensitivity. But I just can't see any reason to use anything but self-etch chemistry on dentin.
And what would be your brands?
It depends. I mean, it's any of them. I don't even think it matters. I mean, I think Clearfill is still kind of the gold standard there, but every company's got a self-etch one. I concern myself more with self-etch cements just because I live so much in the indirect world. And so cements like Panavia F 2.0, which is a self-etching resin cement, or a multi-link auto mix from Ivoclar. And I don't mind that separate step of mixing the A and B primer, that self-etch, and painting it on the tooth, and then mixing up the cement and seating it. It's such a great way to do things. I can't imagine today doing what we used to do. Let's say we were putting an Emperor's crown on 4 or 5, or like an Emax crown. I can't imagine acid etching a bicuspid today, leaving it on for 15 seconds, rinsing it off, placing the primer and adhesive, and then putting the crown on. I'd be shocked if it didn't have postoperative sensitivity. So I'm just all about the self-etch. It doesn't matter which one. It just doesn't matter which one. There's no brands that.
I want to ask you another. I love talking to you because everyone knows you're going to tell it like it is. Say what you feel. I don't think anybody could get you to say anything you didn't want to say. There's kind of this weird thing I always see in dentistry, and I always talk with friends, where it just seems like every time you meet, a guy doing $1 million, taking home 350, all they do is just a regular practice. They just, do crowns, fillings, cleaning exams, root canals, couple, 2 or 3 hygienists. But there's so much talking out there about, no, you should add ortho Invisalign, or you should go learn sleep apnea and learn how to bill medical, or you should learn how to surgically place implants, or you should go to these institutes and learn all about TMJ and all that stuff. And it just seems like so many people can just do it by just a big, like your dad. Did he do TMJ, sleep apnea, ortho, Invisalign? Your old man, did he do any of that in 35 years? And he didn't work the entire month of August. That's why you became a dentist, because deep down inside you wanted to take off August.
I absolutely I did. I wanted to take off a couple weeks around Christmas as well. And he never worked a Wednesday. And I always loved his rationale. He said, I didn't mind going to work on Monday because I just had Saturday and Sunday off. I don't mind going to work on Tuesday because I have Wednesday off. I don't mind going to work on Thursday because I just had Wednesday off. And I'm cool going to work Friday because I know I have Saturday and Sunday off. I'm like, that's 4 days a week, 7 hours a day. That's 28 hours. That's a pretty damn good part-time job you got there, because we live in a pretty nice house and we all have cars and we're going to private schools. Nice part-time job, Dad. Congratulations.
But these kids are coming out of school and they're like, okay, you were talking about they only had 5 canals of endo, or they didn't do that much stuff, and they're coming out of school and they got a lot of student loans. They're saying, Mike, the man, should I go spend money and learn Invisalign? Should I spend a bunch of money and learn sleep apnea? I mean, if they want to get into implants, Mike, by the time they get a CBCT, an implant system, and go to, say, Dominican Republic with Aaron Garg, they could have a couple $100,000 more into this before they place their first implant. TMJ, TMD, I mean, come on. What percent of your dad's practice was TMJ? So what would you say to them specifically, saying, I just got out of school. Should I really go should I just focus on, a normal practice, or some of these areas really hot and worth the return on investment? And there's even some very famous dentists saying this sleep apnea thing is almost a fad, that it'll go to medicine.
Yeah, I don't think it's a fad. I don't think. I mean, maybe it is going to be taken by medicine. I mean, veneers were way more of a fad than this. Veneers have been down at the lab since 2008 and still haven't recovered, and maybe never will to any great degree. And you were the first person to kind of open my eyes to that way back in 1996, when we were taking a bunch of aesthetic courses, and there was people talking about having an all veneer practice. And you looked at some of their appointment books, and it turns out all they ever worked on were other dentists and their staff members and their family. And it was just like an all referral, all dentist practice of a dentist working on other dentists doing their veneers. And so for me, yeah, I mean, you got to get out of school and you've just got to get some reps in. I mean, if you've only done, 6 crowns and 3 endos, you got to go get some reps in. And it really doesn't matter where you get those reps in. I don't think it's Malcolm Gladwell's, you need to do 10,000 crowns. I think you might need to do something 100 times in dentistry in a short period of time. but it's reps, reps, reps. And so I think the idea of adding other procedures like you were talking about strictly for financial reasons, I don't think that ever really works, because you start to get frustrated, whether it's starting ortho cases and you decide you don't like it, but now you got 18 cases that aren't going to be done for another 24 months. That's kind of a nightmare. Or like you said with TMJ or whatever it might be. I think the reason you add those things is if you're really unhappy with the way you're practicing dentistry, because you're going to be there for a long time and you don't want to burn out. You need something fun. So if you hate giving shots and you hate prepping teeth, then I would say snoring and sleep apnea is a really good way to go. I like it when it's more organic, when there's a dentist who has sleep apnea, or their wife has it, or their dad had it, and they kind of get into it for that reason, because now they have kind of a personal passion for it. But just to get involved with it for the sake of producing and collecting more money because your practice isn't doing well enough, I don't think that ever works. I think there's, you would be successful, doing crowns, doing endo, doing buildups, doing composites, if you were able to present it well to the patients and you had a good financial staff behind you. And so I think that's the wrong reason to do it, to say, ooh, I want to do more than that. I just always look at the Central Valley of California. There's a bunch of dentists kicking butt. In fact, I think one of your classmates is out in Bakersfield, if I recall correctly, from somebody you went to school at UMKC with, who I saw at a lecture. He came up and said hi.
Castine.
Yeah, and they're just killing it there in these areas where everybody thinks, most young dentists think that, oh, I want to be in Newport Beach. I'm going to go down and start a practice there. And I remember talking to a guy who worked for BioLays, and I said, where do you sell most of your lasers? In Newport Beach? He goes, are you kidding me? He goes, those dentists don't have two pennies to rub together and get turned down for the financing. He says, if we go to Bakersfield, if we go to Fresno, if we go to Modesto, those are the dentists who can pay for it in cash. And it reminds me of what Joe Steven, a dentist from the Midwest who passed away. Used to always talk about too, his kind of, bread and butter practice. And so unless you really hate those other things, I mean, dentistry's dentistry. You're going to find things that appeal to you more, but it's all kind of a pain unless you find something that really speaks to you. And hopefully it's the interactions with the patients that kind of make it all okay, that, this crown didn't fit and the endo x-ray, your assistant cut off the apex again or whatever. It's all going to be kind of difficult, but adding stuff, if it really makes you excited and it really seems like something where you would do it for free, I don't want to say for free, but if you do it for like 50% of what you're making on crown and bridge, then I think that's a much better reason to get involved with that stuff. But I have a good friend, Todd Morgan, who you should interview on this podcast. He's one of the best dentists I know in terms of hands, and he's half restorative dentistry and half obstructive sleep apnea. But his dad had obstructive sleep apnea, and he just made an appliance for his dad 15 years ago, and they got really fascinated with what he could do with it. And now he's writing, chapters and sleep apnea textbooks, and he's really into it. And so, there are times, Howard, like if you have a dentist who's 65 years old and has problems bending over and prepping, a bunch of teeth, or with a back issue or something like that. Obstructive sleep apnea is as close as you can get to thinking man's dentistry. You know what I mean? You're working with medical people. You're looking at sleep studies, and then you're sending people home with take-home sleep monitors to see how the adjustments are going. It's close to ortho in the sense that there's not a lot of prepping and other things that need to be done. But that's not to say that it's easy. It's just a different way to kind of do things. But if somebody just was in the place where they couldn't bend over and prep or sit there for a long time and do endo, you could certainly, recommend those things. But they'd be kind of desperate, I think, at that point, because they couldn't do traditional dentistry. But you got to get quick. You got to get fast and good at those basics, because it all just becomes work. It's all work. You're all still going to work and doing things. There's nothing. I remember you said to me once, you were like, it's just the nature of life. I remember you said to me, you love Big Macs, but you're like, oh, no, you were asking me if I wanted to live forever. And I was like, I don't know. Why? I guess so. And you're like, I don't. And I go, why not? And you're like, how many times can you eat a Big Mac? How many times can you eat the same Big Mac? How many times can you have sex with the same woman? It was like, I mean, at some point it does become routine, and it's not the thing that it was before. And life and dentistry are the same way.
Oh, I always thought, the first time they explained to me heaven and hell, I thought to myself, okay, if you never die, that would be the ultimate hell. I mean,
Right.
could you imagine doing something a million times, then doing it a billion million times, and then a trillion million billion times? I mean, God, everybody would just be walking around shooting themselves, hanging. I mean, it'd be horrible.
I know. I mean, I've only done this podcast 3 times and I'm sick of it. I can't imagine if we did this.
We're gonna do this every day, just me and you. Hey,
Uh,
you mentioned Chip Cassidy. I want to make a couple points about him. We graduated from UMKC in '87. Everybody was wanting to build a dental office on the beach, and he went to way inland to the armpit of California, Bakersfield. That's what Johnny Carson called it, the armpit of California. So he works 4 10-hour days, then he flies his airplane or drives his Porsche to Newport Beach or whatever, where his condo is on the deal. But he did something very interesting. We went all the way through the Pankey Institute together, and the most successful dentists I ever met in my life, they learned all that implant training, and then they went and found themselves a big denture factory that had been there for, denture world for, 10, 20, 30 years in some very low income area, and then walked in there and added a new treatment where instead of just relining a denture or making a new denture, we could place 2, 4, 6 implants underneath it. And so they would buy these little denture practices that were doing 500,000 a year and just really low cost dentures, and then they'd add the implant section to it. Next thing you know, they were doing $3.5 million a year. I mean, just unbelievable. But I want to ask you another question about. You said veneers peaked in 2008. So, Mike, I want you to weigh in on this. 2005, the ADA statistics show that dentists max their income at $219,000, and then the next decade after, it's dropped $45,000 a year to $174,000. I mean, every year that goes by, dentists make $4,500 less than the year before, and now we're at 174. And 2016 will come in at probably 171, maybe 169. You're with the big company, the biggest company in the world. They know that their success is based on the success of dentists. I mean, if the 2 million dentists around the world don't do well, either will Dentsply Sirona. Why do you think dental income has peaked at 2005? Veneers stopped at 2008. We're down to 174. What do you think that trend's all about? What's driving that mostly?
I don't know. I just know that at Glidewell during that time, that things continued to grow at the lab because at $99 for a unit, when you could argue that the more challenging dental practice was, the better a lab like that did, with $99 crowns. And by the way, I remember when you graduated from the Pankey Institute, I asked you what you learned in all those courses, what you learned, and you said, find the blue dot and grind on it. I'll never forget. That was your summation.
But that's why I love Jim Glidewell, because I remember walking in the Pankey Institute, and the first 5 minutes, Erwin Becker walks out there and he starts describing how you want to build a practice with A patients. Then he described the B patients and the C patient, the patient you don't want to have. And when he described the patient you don't want to have, that was the entire Farran family pedigree in Parsons, Kansas. He just completely identified all my uncles, cousins, nephews living in fifth wheels and trailer parks. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be a rich dentist in Scottsdale or Key Biscayne. That's what I loved about Jim Glidewell is all these highfalutin dentists would make fun of Glidewell, and it's like Glidewell, by reducing the price of a crown, gives my family the freedom to afford dentistry. And if dentistry is about just treating the kings and the queens, you can count me out. I mean, when I came to Phoenix, I went to Phoenix. I didn't go to Scottsdale or Paradise Valley or Sun Valley or any of that stuff. I went down here where it was where if I don't bathe for 3 days, my patients are like, he's cleaner than me.
As you once pointed out, if Jesus was a dentist, he would never go to the Pankey Institute. He'd be working on the hookers and lepers in a free clinic. And, so you're right. And, Jim's dream, and I think it was a dream because I'm not sure it's ever happened, but his dream was always that by providing, hopefully clinically acceptable restorative work at $99, that dentists would pass the savings on to their patient. I'm not sure that that ever happened, but it did allow, people with lower fees to maybe be able to do the work in the U.S. and not have to send it overseas. But I don't know, Howard. I've been in Glidewell for 15 years and now with Sirona for a year. I've been out enough of the private practice game, or the charging money for dentistry game anyway, that's really kind of one of those bigger questions that's, there's probably nobody better than you to actually answer a question like that. What do you think has been, we've seen a lot of the lab work from the dental corporate groups go offshore. The one who's kept it here in the U.S. is Pacific Dental. They don't even tell their dentists which lab to use. So we've seen the lab industry contract as these groups started to send more and more of their work to China or Vietnam or the Philippines. It doesn't seem like corporate dentistry so far is starting to squeeze the average GP who you're talking about. What do you think's doing it?
Well, corporate is only 12% of the market right now. They got 8,000 dentists out of 211,000. They're doing $6 billion a year in an industry that's doing 269. So that's not a factor. I would say it's most definitely from when you and I got out of school. The business model was we take our cost, we add a profit, we submit our fee, and the insurance paid a percentage of that fee. And
Right.
then it's completely switched over to now, instead of cost plus profit equals price, and they'll pay a fee. Now the insurance gives you a fee, PPO. 82% of the general dentists participate in a PPO, and then you subtract your profit and arrive at a budget. And these dentists don't have a budget. The average PPO is about a 35 to 40% reduction in fees. So they switch from indemnity fee for service to PPO, but they didn't change their budget. They just kept on doing their same thing. They're not driving down their costs. I mean, you should have one eye on the patient, one eye on cost, and you drive down cost to make your profit. They haven't changed their behavior, but they dropped their fee by signing up for a PPO 35 to 40%. And I don't think it's even dawned on them.
Right.
It's starting to dawn on them.
Right. And so it just continues to kind of slip down farther and farther. I know. Remember the good old days when we passed up physicians?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were above them for like a year or two, and then it started its slow decline back down again.
So I would say it's all PPO driven.
Yeah, and that's not what I mean. Most of the time when I'm here, dentists do talk about that at my lectures. They seem like they're talking more about kind of local economy and this and that and the other things, but I never stop to ask them what insurances they take. I have a question for you. You shocked the world. There's not many times where things actually shock the world. You shocked the world by completing your first and then second Ironman. That was an amazing thing.
Third, buddy. I've done 3 in a row. I started when I was 50.
Oh,
I'm 53 now. I did 3.
Oh, see, I must have missed the third one on Facebook. That is one of those things. I don't think there's any better example of somebody doing something and inspiring others than you doing that. And I lost a lot of weight before I did my first one. But you also complained to me, I remember, while you were training for one of them, that how am I doing all this work training for an Ironman and still gaining weight? You appear to be an endomorph, I guess, if we were to look at like a body size. Tell me a little bit about your diet and what you're eating these days.
Well, I read everything on obesity because it's a huge issue in my family. I mean, everyone has it to varying degrees, from just mild obesity to moderate to extreme. And I have to tell you that I've talked to many obesity researchers, and they say it's still a disease. They still say there's a lot to be learned. I think a lot of it's just appetite. I have 4 boys, and they live with me for years. I got 2 of them still living with me, and 2 of them almost never eat. They're just never hungry, or whatever. And then me and the heavier ones, we're just, every time we walk by the kitchen, we have this urge to eat a sandwich, or we're just always hungry. I think the big part of it might be just appetite alone.
Yeah, and I think you're making an argument that it's genetic, right? That it's one of those things that's kind of pre-programmed.
No, I'm making the argument that it's a disease. I mean, when your brain, okay, like everybody who's a heroin addict or on meth, almost all of them went off,
right?
But they have a hard time getting off. Every smoker I know wants to quit.
Right.
I think every fat person knows when they're walking in their refrigerator and they're going to go make something to eat that they can't be hungry. They don't need nutrition. So I think a disease is when you are doing something you shouldn't do, in my case eating, and you're smart and you can do a root canal and you can place an implant, but for some reason you got to go make a sandwich. And it's
Right.
just, it just blows my mind how hard that is to stop snacking, stop overeating. Because I did learn after 3 Ironmans that you can't exercise the way to fit. Exercise makes you fit. Diet makes you, abs are made in the kitchen.
Right.
And fitness is made in cardio.
Right.
And so I just think it's a disease that a smart guy like me just has a hard time not eating.
Right. Well, so it's got a spiritual component to it, right? You think?
A spiritual component? Are you going to blame this on Jesus? I got to hear this. Go ahead. How did Jesus make me fat? Continue.
No, no. No, it's the Mormons. No, it's not. I didn't mean not religious, but I mean it's something inside. I mean the walking by the kitchen and knowing I'm not hungry, but making the sandwich and eating anyway is an attempt, I would say, to soothe oneself, to fill a hole inside of you at some level that exists, that even though you don't want to do this behavior, like the heroin addict, you're going to do it anyway because it's going to change the way you feel. And it's using something external, whether it be a sandwich or hell, exercise for that matter, although it's probably a healthier one, to change the way you feel.
Well, how's your podcast? AccidentalGeniusPod.com with Joshua Austin.
Yeah, because every once in a while, like once every 7 episodes, we say something really smart. And it was never on purpose, and so that's why we're the accidental geniuses.
How often is that show now?
It's usually weekly. I've been making it tough on Josh because I've been traveling so much that it's been kind of difficult lately in the last couple weeks. But we're pretty good about doing it weekly, and we usually take the time to fly out so we can do it in person with each other instead of Skyping.
Where's he at?
He's in San Antonio, Texas. He just became the president of the San Antonio Dental Association last night. So really smart kid. He's getting older now, but like him a lot. And he's out lecturing now too on something you and I never had to worry about, Howard, which is you and I early in our practices never had to deal with a bad Yelp review because somebody had sensitive posterior composites. Are you? Is that something you're having to deal with now, or today's dental having to deal with?
I think the bad Yelp review is kind of like what Bob Ibsen, who just passed away last week at 83 years old.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah, Bob Ibsen just passed away, and I remember one time when Bob Ibsen got a bad review on Dental Town, his genius response, I think it was Rod Kurthy. And his genius response was, "Hey, I'm gonna." He called him up and said, "Come on down, spend the day with me, learn me something. I see on Dental Town you hate all my products. Come spend the day with me and tell me why." And so success is so often counterintuitive.
Right.
And I thought some guy in Dental Town, when I posted RIP to Bob Ibsen, I mean, he wrote the first book on cosmetic dentistry. It was called Adhesive Dentistry.
Right.
And what he wanted out there in that whitening California revolution, they didn't sell the stuff, so he started his own dental materials called Denmat. Right. And he was also the first one, all toothpaste was a PPO, Colgate, Crest, all the same price. He was the first one that came out with a high-end toothpaste, and he priced it at twice of what everyone else was charging and made a mint. And somebody said after where I posted RP that, well, I didn't agree with everything he said. Well, have you ever met anyone on earth that you agreed with anything he said? But my God, what a pioneering guy.
Totally. I have never, yeah, and you'll never meet, I've never met anybody who I agree with everything that they say. I mean, except for Donald Trump. I've never met anybody who but Bob wasn't right about everything. He said he would outlive you, so.
He was just an amazing man. What I liked about Bob is he would just try anything. Like when he launched his toothpaste, he wanted to support the Miss Universe contest or whatever, and it was like $5 million. I mean, what a huge hunk of change.
Right.
And he just thought, yeah, I'll do it. I mean, if the ADA wanted to pass a $5 million advertising campaign, how long do you think that would be in committee?
Yeah, that's not all you ever wanted them to do was run one ad for periodontal disease in the Super Bowl, and that never actually happened either.
And Bob would just like, yeah, I'll try anything once, I mean,
right.
He was just an amazing guy, unbelievable guy.
Yeah, Bob Ibsen, Jim Glidewell, Dan Fisher, Howard Farran. one of these doesn't belong. No, I'm just no, because what you do, we're gonna.
And Bill Dragon of Centrix.
Yeah. Bill Dragon was another great example of, and we're probably missing a few, like the Parkel guy, and there's probably a few other. But it's just neat to see dentists kind of be able to go and do things like this, create companies, find a need, that's waiting to be filled in dentistry or in society, and go after it. Because we sit there as clinical dentists and we trade time for money, most of the time, and to be able to see them go out and create these businesses and fight it out with companies with like MBAs running them, it's always pretty cool. I love seeing dentists' success stories.
You mentioned Parkel. That was my favorite David Hornbrecht joke of all time. He said, I just want to tell you that the Parkel Journal is not peer reviewed. That was a classic joke. Yeah, and one more thing, in our lifetimes, it looks like, we lecture all around the world, and Ryan and I spent 18 days in Asia. Me, Ryan, and Greg went to Tokyo, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. Then we had another 10-day trip to Johannesburg, South Africa, so and all that. But no matter where you go in the world, the Generation Xers and the millennials are looking at their baby boomer parents and say, what was wrong with these people? They work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And like my mom and dad had 7 kids, and my dad worked all day, every day till he dropped dead. And it seems like the birth rates are plummeting in Japan. You need 2.3 kids just to keep the herd stable. The Japan, it's under 1. You now have half a dozen countries giving economic subsidies to women to have babies. I think that's another huge growth in corporate dentistry. 65% of their employees are women dentists, and they say, my husband's a dentist or a banker or a lawyer, and I want to leave at 5 o'clock, and I want to have a life. I want to be happy. I want to have a kid. I want to be a soccer mom. They look at, Howard, who gets out of school and did 7 to 7 Monday through Saturday for the first decade without even taking a breath. They just look at that like that is complete insane. I mean, the number one thing all 4 of my kids tell me in common, Dad, slow down. Just, so I think the millennials are correcting a lot of our behaviors.
It's funny because it was no more than 3 days ago that I was thinking of something your dad once said and something you used to repeat all the time. And that was, work like no man has for a decade, and reap like no man has the rest of your life. Right, exactly. And I thought that's it's a good philosophy, and it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, it's tough to work. I mean, it's an expression. You can't really work. You can't outwork everybody who's ever been on the planet before you. But I think it's a pretty good expression about, hey, put in, the training now and pull back and cruise a little later. So I get what the millennials are saying, that it looks like this crazy puritanical work ethic about work is next to godliness, and the more hours you spend, the better person you are. But by the same token, you get to the point where you realize you missed out. It's a reason why grandparents, sometimes enjoy their grandkids more than their own kids. They have a little more time and a little less stress, in their lives. But I do think that if you can somehow forge a balance between the two, I mean, how comfortable does your living have to be? 7 to 7, 6 days a week still sounds insane to me today.
And it doesn't sound like Gordon Christian. He's over 80. I mean, I know he's 80 because a couple of years ago I lectured the same day with him on a program in Pennsylvania. I was Friday, he was Saturday, and it was his 80th birthday then, and that was a couple of years ago. So he's got to be 81, 82. He still works and he's still lecturing 60, 70 times a year.
Yeah. And even when you go to his hands-on courses in Provo, during lunch, I've been up there for a few of them recently, and during lunch, when everybody else eats lunch, he goes back to his office and returns a few emails, and then eats like 3 sunflower seeds, and then goes back to lecturing.
Yeah, crazy. So we had you you were the first one. I couldn't think of a better first guest. You were 200, you were 400. When you come back, will you come back on for 600?
I'd like to be on the last one. Is that 600?
Okay, well, you know when the last one is? I mean, what are we booked at? We stopped taking appointments. We're booked out till February, 1 a day till February. And we stopped taking reservations because everybody's complaining. February, it's only, what is it, May? But there's just so many great interviews to do that and this show's gone viral. It's crazy numbers. I mean, every lecture I get, every podcast I do is the biggest lecture I ever gave. The biggest lecture I ever gave in the flesh was at the Aesthetica 2000 conference in Sao Paulo, Brazil, to 4,000 dentists.
Right.
And then I've done about a dozen in Vegas to about 2,000. God, every single podcast I do dwarfs that. I mean, at the more. But I got at 600. I'm gonna remind you of this quote. You're gonna give me a quote right now, and I'm gonna remind you of 600. Mike the man DiTolla, who's gonna be the next president, Hillary or Trump? And you're gonna be reminded of this in half a year when we'll see how your prediction was.
Wow. It seems like it's an IQ test for America that the rest of the world has gotten behind. They want to like test and see if we can make the right call here. It's a really difficult one. I remember that watch you used to have that counted down Clinton's days in office. And you'd start every lecture by reminding the crowd how long we had till a Republican would be back in office. I don't know. I don't think Trump can do it. I don't know. I know I don't know. I'm gonna pick Hillary, but I'm gonna say this too, that if I didn't know, like if I didn't tell you who was president, do you think you could look around like 4 years from now? I don't tell you who was elected president. Do you really think you can look around and tell me just by like the state of the economy and what's going on in Phoenix
This is what I can tell you from my own personal experience. Living on this rock for 53 laps around the sun. You see patterns. You don't really know what's right and wrong, or you can't explain everything, but you definitely recognize patterns. And if you just looked at the numbers of this economy, I mean, under 5% unemployment, no inflation, solid 3% growth. I mean, the rule of 72, you take the percent growth divided by 72. So basically, every 24 years, the GDP will double. So my kids and grandkids, every generation is getting better. You look at the numbers, then you look at it around the world and you say, oh my God, America's perfect. And then in my 53 years, every time I see a country like that, that's totally normal, whether it be Italy or Sweden or Germany or whatever, and they start putting up crazy candidates, it's because right now the numbers you're showing the sheep, and the numbers say the sheep are all fine, but the sheep are all stirring and mooing, and you can't see the little wolf walking around scaring the hell out of everybody. And every time I've seen a country put up right-wing, xenophobes, fascists, crazy stuff like that, the economy started to tumble there shortly after. So I think when you look at the unemployment of 5%, why is everybody so freaked out about imports in Mexico and want to build a wall and Chinese imports? So I would say this, the average recession is every 8 years. The last one was 8 years ago, 2008. I've seen many countries put up crazy people before, and anybody who took an MBA school will tell you that the number one predictive stat for the future is the consumer confidence interval. And when the sheep are all this riled up and the numbers show nothing, the numbers are about to change. So I would say that there's a vast amount of economic uncertainty, and that the economy is not as stable as the tarot card readers think it is.
Are you saying Hillary?
No, I'm just saying there. Well, I would think Trump is a better marketer because
Right.
his whole, he's a billionaire, and his scale was marketing.
Right.
And so he's a better marketer. So I'd say he has a better ad. The chances do all these NASCAR people that he motivates, do they actually show up to vote?
Right.
So who actually shows up to vote? I mean, most of the people I know, they all bitch and moan and complain, but they almost never vote.
Let me say this: in my experience, a Republican can never win without the Hispanic vote, and he clearly doesn't have that, and that's why my pick's Hillary.
Yeah, but he's such a marketer that who knows? You might take the top 5 Spanish singers and pop artists, whatever, might be doing $20 million worth of commercials a day, but who knows? But all I'll say is this: I don't care if it's Trump or Hillary, because they're all going to lie, cheat, steal, and let me down. But I would just say that there's got to be more economic uncertainty, which is kind of troubling in dentistry, because we peaked at 219 in 2005. It slipped to 174, and so we never recovered from the last recession. I remember the chief economist of American Dental Association wrote a brilliant essay called Dentists, Lawyers, and Lattes. And they're saying dentists, the legal profession, and Starbucks, all three have never recovered back to pre-recessionary days of 2008. So it's going to be very weird if we don't even recover from the last recession to go into more economic turmoil.
Right. Right.
But Mike, seriously, you're my idol. You're a rock star. I love you to death. I think you're one of the greatest humans and dentists the world has ever had. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time today.
You are absolutely welcome. And, you know, I was people always say, how'd you get started lecturing? And I say, I saw Howard Farran lecture and I said, holy shit, you can stand on stage and say stuff like that. And that was like, it ignited something inside of me. And you were nice enough to let me follow you around on like 12. Remember that? We went
Yeah,
for like
hell
15
yeah.
or 20 lectures. We traveled together and I just watched how you did it and what was done and everything that happened. And that was I always tell people I went to the Howard Farran School of Lecturing. And
And I think those were some of the most fun times of my life. I mean, you and I hanging out all those seminars. But I thought what was, a lot of lecturers, they come, they do a lot of invitationals, and they're gone. It's kind of like, who are the bands where people say, oh, I saw that band.
right.
But then there's these other bands that every time they come around, their fans come back. And so I think staying power in the lecture circuit, I mean, I'm still getting tons of invitationals. I think it was all because I wasn't going to wear a suit and tie. I wasn't going to be politically correct because my old school from Kansas, like, if I really love you and I respect you, I'm going to tell you what I exactly think.
Right.
But if I'm going to stand here in a suit and tie and be all politically correct and stand behind a stodium and read PowerPoints, that's not love and respect. So I just take that damn, like, people always say, what are you gonna talk about? I don't even know. I don't even care. I'm asking people when they're walking in what they want to talk about, and I just talk to them like we were on a fishing boat killing a 12-pack.
And when Ryan came on before we started the podcast, he said, "What do you want to talk about?" I go, "I don't know." He said,
Yeah.
"All right, I'll go get my dad."
Yeah, and a lot of whenever anyone ever tells me when I left, they go, "My God, who's gonna follow that?" And I always say, "There's one guy that can follow me that will crush it, and that's Mike the Man DiTolla." I've said that. I've only recommended one person my whole life. I always say, if you want someone to follow that, it's got to be DiTolla. And on that note, DiTolla, thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you, Howard. Appreciate it. See you at 600.